Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Um, Today we're going to be looking at anger,
Ooh.
but specifically how it shows up in our relationships.
Okay.
And to help us with this, we're going to be looking at excerpts from Harriet Lerner's book, The Dance of Anger.
Oh, yeah, I love that book.
Oh, good. So you're familiar with it?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So this book, it's full of like those light bulb moments, where you start to think about how you approach all these like tricky relationship dynamics in new ways.
Yeah, and one of the things I really appreciate about Lerner's approach is that she doesn't see anger as just this negative, destructive force.
Right. It's not all bad.
Right, it's not all bad.
Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, she actually argues that anger is a really valuable signal.
Okay, so instead of just like pushing it down or trying to avoid it altogether,
Mm-hmm.
we should actually be paying attention to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anger can actually tell us a lot about what's going on in a relationship.
Goes like a clue.
It is a clue. Yeah. It can be a sign that something's off. Like maybe a need isn't being met.
Okay.
Or a boundary's been crossed. Or maybe you're, giving too much of yourself and not getting enough in return.
So when you feel that anger kind of bubbling up, it's like an invitation to get curious and be like, okay, what's going on here?
Exactly. What's this anger trying to tell me?
Yeah.
What needs attention?
And what's interesting is that Lerner points out how society, especially, like teaches women to suppress their anger.
Oh, absolutely. It's like we're supposed to be the peacekeepers.
Right.
Always nice and agreeable, never ruffle any feathers.
Yeah, like a good woman doesn't get angry.
Right. Which, let's face it, is totally unrealistic.
Yeah, no one's like that.
No one.
And the problem is that all that suppression,
Yeah.
it comes at a cost.
Right. Huge cost.
Yeah.
It can lead to resentment, self-doubt, missed opportunities for growth.
Yeah, and just like feeling disconnected from yourself
Absolutely.
because you're not honoring your true feelings.
Yeah, you're not being authentic.
So right off the bat, Lerner's got us questioning these like deeply ingrained messages about anger, especially for women.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever felt that pressure to just like swallow your anger?
Yeah.
Maybe even felt guilty for feeling it at all?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's something most of us have experienced on some level, especially.
Right.
Yeah. And it's worth reflecting on because, as we're going to see, understanding anger and expressing it in a healthy way can actually be key to having stronger relationships.
Okay, so now Lerner introduces this metaphor that I just love.
Oh, yeah.
It's the dance of anger.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's basically like how our anger can actually backfire on us,
Right.
if we're not careful.
Instead of leading to resolution and understanding, it can
Uh-huh.
lock us into these repetitive cycles.
It's like we're stuck in a rut doing the same old dance moves over and over again,
Exactly. Even if those moves aren't working.
even though we're miserable.
To-
Yeah. So one of the patterns she highlights is this dynamic between what she calls overfunctioning and underfunctioning
Okay.
in relationships.
Right? So there's this imbalance
Yeah.
where one person's kind of carrying more of the weight.
Right. It's like one person's doing all the emotional heavy lifting.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Lerner actually uses the analogy of a seesaw to illustrate this.
Oh, okay. I like that.
One person's always on the bottom.
Right.
Overfunctioning,
Mm.
trying to keep things balanced, often at the expense of their own needs.
And the other person's like up in the air.
Yeah, they might be more emotionally distant or avoidant.
So Lerner shares this example in the book that really struck me. This woman named Barbara, who wants to attend an anger management workshop.
Okay. Seems pretty straightforward.
Right. You would think so.
Yeah.
But her husband is like totally resistant to the idea.
Really?
He even threatens to leave her if
Yeah.
she goes.
Wow. So his reaction was kind of extreme.
It was way out of proportion.
Yeah.
And what Lerner points out is that this actually reveals a much deeper dynamic
Oh, interesting.
that's happening in their relationship. It's not
Okay.
just about the workshop itself.
Right.
It's about control, a fear of change,
Wow.
and all these like unspoken rules
Hmm.
that are kind of gogoverning their interaction.
That makes sense. It's like those seemingly small everyday conflicts can actually be symptoms of much bigger patterns.
Totally.
Yes.
So in Barbara's case, it was this fear of rocking the boat.
Right.
Her husband was so used to her overfunctioning and accommodating his needs
Mm.
that the idea of her changing and like asserting herself was really threatening to him.
He felt like he was losing control.
Yeah. And Barbara being, quote unquote, the good wife,
Mm-hmm.
had been playing her part in this dance for years, probably without even realizing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, as you think about your own relationships, are you on the bottom of the seesaw anywhere?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you overfunctioning to avoid conflict?
Mm.
What's the cost of that pattern for you?
It's a really important question to ask ourselves, because often those seemingly small moments, those everyday interactions, that's where the dance of anger really plays out.
Yeah, those little things add up.
They do.
Now, Lerner takes this whole dance of anger idea a step further, and she applies it specifically to couples.
Okay, how so?
She argues that couples often get locked into these, like, predictable patterns
Oh, yeah.
of interaction.
Like they're doing the same dance routine over and over.
Exactly.
Even if they're stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah, even if they're both miserable.
Right. It's like this self-perpetuating cycle.
And one of the most common patterns that she describes is this pursuer-distancer dynamic.
Ah, yes. The classic come closer, go away game. I
Oh.
think we've all been there at some point, haven't we?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One person seeking closeness, connection, maybe even reassurance,
Mm-hmm.
and the other person's pulling away, needing space, or feeling overwhelmed by all that intensity.
You know, this reminds me of a recurring argument I used to have with my partner. It was about our son's development.
Oh, yeah. I think most parents can relate to those disagreements. What happened?
While my son wasn't hitting certain milestones, that all the parenting books said he should.
Okay.
So I was worried, doing all the research, consulting experts, classic overfunctioning.
Yeah.
But my partner, he was in total denial. He would just brush off my concerns and say, he's fine, he'll catch up.
So you were the pursuer seeking reassurance,
Yeah.
trying to get him to engage with your anxieties, and he was the distancer,
Exactly.
minimizing the problem withdrawing.
It was the same dance over and over.
Oh,
I'd get anxious, he'd withdraw, I'd get even more anxious.
that escalated.
It did.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I had this aha moment that things started to shift.
What was the aha moment? What changed?
Well, I realized that by constantly voicing my worries in such an intense way, I was actually fueling his denial.
Oh, wow.
My intensity was making it harder for him to even access his own concerns.
You were kind of confirming his fears in a way?
Well, I was. And it was only when I started to approach the situation with more calmness and understanding that he was able to open up and share his perspective.
That's so powerful.
It was a game changer.
Yeah.
And it really illustrates Lerner's point about self-awareness. It's not about blame.
Right.
It's about understanding our own role in these dances.
Yeah.
How are our actions, even those driven by love or concern,
Mm-hmm.
contributing to the dynamic that we're trying to change?
Like sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to take a step back,
Yes.
examine our own behavior, and ask ourselves, how am I contributing to the problem?
Such a powerful question.
Yeah. So now Lerner takes this analysis even deeper
Okay.
and starts talking about the influence of our families of origin.
Our families of origin
Okay.
on these anger dances.
So like how our childhood experiences
Yeah.
shape the way we relate to others.
Yeah. Basically, she argues that these unresolved issues from our families, they often get replayed in our present relationships.
Mhm.
It's like we're carrying these old scripts with us
Right.
without even realizing it.
Yeah, so those patterns we learned as children can actually be driving our behavior in our adult relationships even years later.
Exactly. It's like these echoes from the past.
And she really stresses the importance of differentiating ourselves from our families,
Okay.
like developing a clear sense of I-A
Mhm.
while still maintaining those connections.
Right. So finding that balance.
Yeah, it's about like honoring where you came from, but also recognizing that you're your own person.
You're not your family.
Yeah, and Lerner illustrates this with a really powerful example. The story of Maggie.
Maggie.
Maggie and her overbearing mother.
Ah, classic.
Yeah.
So what happened there?
Well, Maggie was constantly being criticized by her mom about her parenting choices.
Oh, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that,
Oh, yeah, big time.
especially those of us with strong-willed mothers.
Right. So Maggie's mom had all these opinions about how she should be raising her daughter, Amy.
And it's like a classic example of generational patterns repeating themselves.
Totally.
Right.
Maggie's mom was trying to control her, just like she had probably been controlled by her own mother.
Yeah, and so the cycle continues.
And I love about Maggie's story is that she finally finds her voice.
Good for her.
She sits her mother down. She's like, look, I appreciate your concern, but Amy is my child, and I need to parent her in a way that feels right for me.
Wow, that must have been hard.
It was huge.
Hmm.
It was her setting boundaries, claiming her own authority as a mother, stepping out of that old dynamic.
So she broke the cycle.
She did. But here's the thing. It wasn't just like a one-time conversation.
Oh, I bet there was pushback.
Oh, tons. Maggie faced a series of what Lerner calls tests.
Yes.
Her mom didn't just accept these new boundaries
That's not.
right away.
Yeah.
There was pushback, there were guilt trips,
Right.
there were attempts to kind of like reinstate the old dynamic.
It's like her mom was saying, we don't do things that way in this family.
Exactly. And it's so easy to cave in those moments.
Right.
Right.
Totally.
But Maggie stood her ground.
She did.
She reasserted her position while still staying connected to her mom.
It's finding that balance, isn't it?
It is. And eventually things started to shift.
Okay.
Their relationship became more balanced, more respectful.
Wow. So it's possible to change those deeply ingrained family patterns.
It is. It takes courage, though.
Yeah.
It takes persistence
Right.
and a willingness to kind of weather those counter moves
Those counter moves.
because they will come.
They will.
So if you think about your own family dynamics, what patterns have you inherited? What scripts are you still carrying?
And how might those be influencing your own anger dances in your current relationships?
These are really important questions to ask yourself because as we're seeing, the dance of anger often has roots that go way deeper than just the immediate situation.
It's about understanding those patterns, those unspoken rules,
Yeah.
and then finding the courage to move differently.
Exactly. To create something new.
I love that.
Yeah. And more fulfilling.
I've-
It's like those echoes from childhood can really impact how we handle things like conflict and anger, and even how we approach closeness with people we care about.
Yeah, those early experiences can be pretty powerful.
Definitely. But the good news is, once we're aware of those patterns, we can start to make different choices.
Exactly. We're not destined to repeat the past.
Right. We have the power to change.
And Learner offers some really practical tools for shifting those dances.
Oh, good. I like practical.
Me too.
So tell me more.
Well, one of the most powerful concepts she introduces is this idea of thinking in threes.
Thinking in threes.
Yeah. Have you ever noticed how when there's tension between two people, a third person often gets pulled in?
Oh, all the time. It's like that saying, two's company, three's a crowd.
Exactly. But in this case, the crowd can actually make things more complicated.
So instead of talking directly to the person we're angry with, we end up kind of like venting to someone else.
Right. And while a little venting can be harmless when it becomes a pattern, it can actually prevent us from addressing the real issues in the relationship.
So it's like we're avoiding the real conversation.
Exactly. And Lerner gives this really compelling example of this. Remember Sarah,
Oh, yes, sir.
whose son Jerry was dating a woman she didn't approve of?
Oh, yes, Sarah and Julie. I think a lot of people can relate to that whole in-law dynamic.
Definitely. So Sarah was really struggling with Jerry's choice of partner. She kept trying to convince him that Julie wasn't right for him, that he was making a mistake.
That's tough.
Uh,
Sounds like classic motherly concern.
it does. But how is this a triangle? Where's the third person?
That's a good question.
Well, in this case, Sarah was so focused on fixing Jerry's relationship that she wasn't addressing her own anxieties and fears. She was making Julie the problem instead of dealing with what was really going on between her and her son.
I see. So instead of talking directly to Jerry about her concerns, she's kind of like gossiping and complaining to other people.
Right. And remember, Jerry was in his 30s and still living at home. Sarah was grappling with her own anxieties about letting go about her son becoming an independent adult. But instead of acknowledging those feelings, she channeled them into disapproval of Julie.
Wow. So she's pulling in all these other people to validate her disapproval instead of having that direct conversation with Jerry.
Exactly.
That's a classic triangle.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's not just about families. Lerner shows how these triangles operate in workplaces, friendships, really any system where there are relationships.
So if we find ourselves constantly venting to someone about a third person, that might be a sign that we're in a triangle.
Yeah, it's a good red flag. It's often easier to complain to someone else than to address the issue head on with the person involved.
So going back to Sarah, how did she break out of this triangle? Because it sounds like she was pretty stuck in her disapproval of Julie.
Well, it took some time and self-reflection, but eventually Sarah had this breakthrough. She realized that she was making Jerry responsible for her happiness, for her sense of purpose,
Oh, wow.
which of course isn't fair to him. No, not at all. We're all responsible for our own happiness.
Right.
And Sarah needed to take ownership of her own feelings about Jerry's choices. Instead of trying to control him, she had to learn to accept that he was an adult, capable of making his own decisions, even if she didn't agree with them.
That must have been really difficult for her.
I'm sure it wasn't easy. But as Sarah started to step out of the triangle, she was able to connect with Jerry in a more authentic, respectful way. And to her surprise, she even started to see some positive qualities in Julie.
It's like all that energy that was tied up in the triangle was suddenly freed up.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
This whole thinking in threes idea is so powerful.
It is. It's a whole new way of looking at those dynamics that can trip us up.
So let's say you've identified a triangle that you're part of. What are some practical steps to start stepping out of it?
The first step is just awareness.
Yeah.
You know, recognize that you're in a triangle and that all the gossiping and blaming is actually keeping you stuck. Then instead of venting to that third person, gather the courage to go directly to the person you're angry with.
I can imagine that's pretty daunting for some people, especially those of us who tend to avoid conflict.
It can be. But remember, the goal isn't to attack or blame the other person. Lerner emphasizes using I statements. It's about taking ownership of your own feelings and needs without making the other person wrong.
Oh, right. Like
Yeah.
saying, I feel hurt when, or
I
need.
Exactly, instead of you always or you never.
It's about being clear and honest, but also respectful.
Yes. And what about boundaries? Lerner talks a lot about the importance of setting clear boundaries in relationships. How does that play into this?
Well, boundaries are crucial, especially for people who tend to overfunction. It's about recognizing that you're not responsible for fixing other people's problems,
Huh.
and you have the right to say no when someone's asking too much of you.
That's so important, especially for women. We're often conditioned to be the caretakers, the fixers,
Like we're supposed to put everyone else's needs first.
and it can be exhausting and ultimately lead to resentment and burnout.
So breaking free from that pattern takes real courage.
It does. It's about recognizing that you're worthy of having your own needs met.
Right. And that your value doesn't come from how much you do for others.
Exactly. This reminds me of another example from the book Lois and her brother Brian.
Oh yeah, Lois the rescuer.
Always swooping in to save the day whenever Brian had a crisis.
And Brian, who always seemed to be having a crisis.
It was another one of those over-functioning, under-functioning dynamics.
So what did Lerner suggest Lois do differently? How could she stop rescuing him?
Well, instead of jumping in to fix Brian's problems, Lerner suggested that Lois simply listen and offer support without taking over. It's about being there for someone without taking on their burdens.
That sounds really hard, though.
It can be. It requires a real shift in mindset, especially for those of us who are used to overfunctioning. We have to relinquish control and trust that the other person is capable of handling their own challenges.
It's about empowering them rather than enabling them.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this can be especially challenging for women.
Right? Because we've been socialized to be the caretakers.
It's like we're the emotional shock absorbers for everyone around us.
So breaking free from those patterns takes real awareness and a commitment to putting yourself first.
It's a radical act of self-love.
This is such rich material. I love how Lerner gives us not only the understanding of these dynamics, but also the strategies to change them.
Yeah, we're just scratching the surface here, but I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We have, and in the next segment, we'll explore some of the challenges and rewards that come with shifting these dances and creating those more fulfilling relationships. It's been really fascinating exploring these anger dances with you. You know, how they show
It's-
up in our relationship.
That's amazing how often we get caught in these patterns without even realizing it.
Totally. But the good news is, Lerner gives us some real tools to break free and move forward.
Yes, she does. She really emphasizes that we have the power to change these dynamics.
Okay, so it's not just about understanding the problem.
Right. It's about taking action.
And one of the most powerful things she talks about is this idea of owning our part in the dance.
Okay, so instead of blaming the other person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get stuck in that, well, if they would just change, then everything would be fine kind of thinking.
Yeah, we all do it. But that just keeps us stuck in a victim mentality.
Right. And it takes away our power to actually create change.
Exactly. Lerner encourages us to let go of the blame and instead look at our own contributions to the dynamic.
That's not always easy, though,
It's not. It takes a lot of honesty and self-awareness.
because it's so much easier to focus on what the other person's doing wrong.
It is. But it's also incredibly empowering because it puts you back in the driver's seat.
Okay, so we're not just helpless victims of other people's behavior.
Right. You have the power to choose how you respond.
And that choice is where things can start to shift.
Exactly. Lerner gives this great example of a woman named Lisa who was constantly fighting with her husband about housework.
Ooh, the classic housework battle. I think most couples can relate to that one.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It was causing a lot of tension and resentment in their marriage.
So Lisa's feeling overwhelmed, unappreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's doing more than her fair share.
Right. And she would complain to her husband. They would argue, but nothing really changed.
Stuck in that cycle.
Exactly. Each person's behavior just fueling the other's frustration.
So what was the turning point for Lisa?
Well, she had this breakthrough where she realized that she had been focusing all her energy on trying to change her husband's behavior
Okay.
instead of looking at her own.
It's so easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah,
You know, it's like, if only they would just do this one thing differently.
it's a natural response. But Lerner points out that this way of thinking actually gives away your power. It makes you dependent on the other person changing in order for you to feel better.
So how did Lisa shift things? What did she do differently?
She decided to stop complaining and start taking action.
Okay.
She sat down with her husband and calmly explained how she was feeling.
So no more blaming or criticizing?
Right. She just stated her needs clearly and directly.
I like that.
Yeah, and then she did something even more important. She changed her own behavior.
What did she do?
She stopped doing all the things she had been doing for her husband out of resentment.
So like picking up his dirty socks or doing his laundry.
Exactly. She stopped enabling him.
And what happened?
Well, her husband started to step up. He saw that Lisa was serious about changing the dynamic, and he responded accordingly.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
It's like our own change of behavior can actually inspire change in others.
it really can. It's about being the change you want to see in the relationship.
Now, Lerner's clear that these changes don't happen overnight.
Right. There will be resistance. There will be pushback, especially from those who benefit from the old pattern.
Oh, yeah. She calls those the counter moves.
Counter moves.
Yeah.
Exactly. Remember Maggie's mom and how she reacted when Maggie started setting those boundaries?
Oh, yeah. All those guilt trips and attempts to pull her back in.
Exactly. Those counter moves can be so intense, and it's easy to get thrown off course.
Yeah, you start to doubt yourself.
Right. But Lerner encourages us to stay the course, to hold on to that clear sense of self and not get pulled back into those old dances.
Okay, so how do we deal with those counter moves? What are some practical things we can do to, like, not give in?
One thing she emphasizes is the importance of having a good support system. Talk to friends, therapists, support groups.
Okay.
Anyone who can offer encouragement and remind you that your needs are valid.
Because it's so easy to feel isolated when you're trying to change those patterns.
It is, especially if the people closest to you are the ones resisting.
So having that outside support is crucial.
Absolutely. We need those people to remind us that we're not crazy, that we're on the right track, and that change is possible.
Lerner also talks about the importance of self-care.
Yes, taking care of yourself is essential.
Yeah.
When we're feeling depleted and overwhelmed, it's so much harder to stay grounded and resist those counter moves.
Right, so it's not selfish to take care of yourself.
No, not at all. It's actually essential for creating healthy relationships.
When you're feeling good, you're better equipped to handle those difficult dynamics.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been such an insightful deep dive. Lerner's work is so helpful for understanding these patterns that we get caught in.
It is. And what I appreciate is that she doesn't just leave us with the problem. She gives us a path forward.
Yeah, she gives us tools to break free from those dances and create something new.
It's about recognizing that anger, while often painful, can actually be a catalyst for growth and transformation in our relationships.
And it's not about waiting for the other person to change.
Right. It's about taking responsibility for your own part and then choosing to move differently.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of anger and relationships.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights and that you feel empowered to create more fulfilling and authentic connections in your own life.